It is really strange from a modern perspective that Sega was so free when it came to licensing their popular arcade games when they had their own series of consoles that could have used the exclusives. Basically, it comes down to Sega being an arcade game company that happened to have some people doing home game systems off to one side. Within a year or two, they'll recognize their mistake, and we're going to see a pretty good set of Sega ports for the PC Engine. The fact that these games were licensed out so freely creates an opportunity to compare the systems that were available on Japanese store shelves. But first, let's take a quick look at the arcade version. Fantasy Zone was an early pioneer of the cute-em-up, a subgenre of shoot-em-ups that feature softer colors and cute characters and are also excessively cruel. The arcade version of Fantasy Zone was such a huge hit for Sega that they turned the ship, Opa Opa, into the company mascot for a few years. Sega ported Fantasy Zone to their Mark III console themselves. This version was released in June of 1986, just a few months after it was available in the arcades. As you might expect from Sega porting one of their own hits, the Mark III version is pretty good, one of the highlights of the platform. Almost exactly 1 year later, Sunsoft developed and published a port of Fantasy Zone on the Famicom, and it's a surprisingly good effort on the Famicom. It was even a little bit closer to the arcade with the addition of some vertical scrolling. This was a technically impressive Famicom game in 1987, and it could stand right next to the Mark III version with no concerns. And then 1 year after that, NEC had Bits Laboratory port Fantasy Zone to the PC Engine for them. And, okay. It is the version that plays the closest to the arcade. The Bits Laboratory was a contract developer whose work is best described as consistently mediocre. The port of Ghostbusters on the NES? That was theirs. So was the terrible Kiki Kai Kai game on the Disk System. The PC Engine version of Fantasy Zone plays well, probably because they had a good model to work from, but there's a few flaws with it that bring it way down. I have to point out that this is the first PC Engine game published by NEC. Even though they were manufacturing the hardware, so far the software has all been left up to their partners at Hudson. They get off to a slow start with their publishing, but NEC starts taking over more and more as Hudson pulls away, and they're going to publish over 100 games on the platform before it's done. In the late days of the system, NEC becomes kind of a default publisher, handling distribution and publication for any PC game developers who want their games out on the PC Engine. It seems like NEC must have been the ones pursuing the relationship with Sega, since all of the ports of Sega games to the PC Engine were published by them. So finally back to Fantasy Zone. And the biggest issue with this version of the game is one that's unfortunately common with the PC Engine ports of the Sega games. The sound is terrible. They murder some of the all-time classic video game tunes, like a middle school orchestra getting their hands on Gershwin. It's especially depressing since the rest of the port is pretty good. The plot of Fantasy Zone is that due to currency manipulation, Opa Opa's planet has gone into a depression. Turns out all of their currency reserves were being depleted in order to build a giant space fortress. So Opa Opa flies off to destroy it in some kind of economic revenge against billionaires. And no, I did not make any of that up. The way the game plays, Opa Opa can freely roam back and forth on every level, and you're trying to destroy enemy generators. Button 2 fires your main gun while Button 1 drops bombs. Individually, the bombs are more powerful, but if you have an auto-fire controller, you're a lot better off just shooting things. The enemy generators require a ton of hits to defeat, but focused fire will take them down pretty fast. A lot of enemies will drop coins, and the generators will drop a bigger coin. Oba Oba needs that cash. That is why they're there after all. After you collect enough cash, a shop balloon will show up. The balloon will float along for a few moments, but eventually fly away. If you run into it, then you get to buy some power-ups. There are 4 kinds of things you can buy in the shop: speed increases, primary weapons, bombs, and extra lives. If you don't get some kind of speed increase, you're gonna die. Enemy and shot patterns just become too dense, and Opa Opa's default speed is way too slow to get through things. The primary weapon power-ups consist of a laser that focuses fire, a wide beam that shoots an arc out in front of Opa Opa, and the surprisingly devastating 7-way shot. It works because enemies don't have any invulnerability frames after they've been hit, so getting close to a generator with it just chews through them. All of the primary weapons work on a time limit. You can only get about 15 seconds of use out of them. Since bosses often take that much time to appear, you're going to be using it more to clear stages than fight them. Bombs, at least, are held until you use them. Twin bombs last forever, and that just means you can fire 2 of your normal bomb shots at once. The flash bomb clears all enemies on the screen. The firebomb does extreme damage to whatever it hits and explodes outward. And the weights drop straight on top of Opa Opa, destroying everything in a vertical line. For the flash, fire, and weight bombs, buying them is buying one use, though you can buy more than one to carry around with you. And of course, extra lives are extra lives. For everything except the speed increases, when you purchase an item, the price increases in the shop, which is just one more reason for you to rely on your regular gun. Save your money for the extra lives. When you die, you lose all of your inventory, so if you do purchase something, be sure to use it, because you can't take it with you. At least the money that you earn will escalate as you proceed through the game. You'll get a lot more cash on Stage 7 than you do on Stage 1. The bosses here can be pretty tough, especially the ones that fire a huge random dispersal pattern, which would be the first and second boss, actually. There will be times that they fire and you just don't have anywhere to go. Though definitely don't go towards the back of the screen, because once Opa Opa's facing is locked, they can't enter roughly the last 10% of the left-hand side of the screen. When bosses die, they explode into an entire shower of coins that you'll have to quickly collect before the stage ends. The final stage is a boss rush. You just fight all of them in turn, though you at least get to visit the shop if you die. The PC Engine version of Fantasy Zone is relatively obscure these days. The game was ported to just about everything, of course, with plenty of arcade-accurate or emulated versions getting released later. But there is one common refrain from the few people who seek out the PC Engine version of Fantasy Zone. And that is, what happened to the music? It's infuriating because, except for that music, this is the best contemporary version of Fantasy Zone. But that music is so bad, you should just run back to the Mark III or Famicom. I think I like the Famicom version a little bit better, but there's nothing wrong with the Mark III version. Just stay away from the PC Engine version. It makes Opa Opa cry